everyone, and welcome back to a weekly how-to with me, Teacup Jojo. Today we're going to continue looking at charts and how we interpret all these symbols into making a square. Last week, which was episode 6, I do believe, if I'm right, this is episode 7. Let me just double check. We are on... No, last week was episode 5 and today is episode 6. So last week I talked to you about chart reading and how to interpret the charts into making your squares. We kept it fairly basic. We were looking at the basic granny square mostly, and then we started to look at a couple of other squares. So today I'm going to show you some charts for working in rows. Now let me just grab this one and let me grab this one. Now these are both for working in the round, and as the granny squares worked in the round as well. I showed you that and how we start in the very middle and then we work outwards. So we've got round 1, round 2, round 3, 4, 5, 6, and that works outwards. And the same on this one. Again, we have round 1, round 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and you look for your starting position. So whether it's your magic circle, which obviously we tell you all the time about that one, that you can use a chain 4 and a slip stitch to make your ring, or whether you're looking for your starting chain. We talked about how to read these kind of charts, okay, working in the round. So I'm going to talk to you a bit about basic chart reading for working in a row today. And depending on how we get on with that, we will either move on to some more advanced charts, or we'll do that in the next tutorial. Okay, so working in rows. Now we don't have a lot of squares that work in rows, but we have had some already, as you can see here. This was number 16. It's missing its number. This was number 16, the basket weave. When if you've already done this one, you'll know that it's you make these strips and then you weave them together. So this isn't strictly actually in a row. This is, you're working in a round outside of it, but part of it's in a row up here. So this was number 16, the basket weave, which I know some of you had a bit of a pickle with. But then we've got here, we've got number 34 and number 24. So number 24 was our chessboard, and number 34 was our waffle along square, which is technically basket weave as well, but we've already called this one basket weave, so we needed a different name. So this was our waffle along square, number 34, and we've got the chessboard for number 24. Now I've done this one 34 because I actually did the video tutorial for that day, but I actually haven't done this one, so I don't have this one to show you my completed square. But if you go onto our Facebook group and look up the albums there for number 24, there are lots in there already to see. So we're going to have a look at these, and I'll talk to you about how we understand what's going on here. Okay, so you won't actually need any yarn today or your hook. You just need to grab a cup of tea, coffee, wine, something, sit back, and hopefully by the end of it you'll be a little more familiar with these charts. Okay, now this is number 24, the chessboard square, and this is the one that was done in 2 colours. So if you can see on here, these symbols are done in the 2 colours. If I can just zoom in, can you see there's 2 different colours there? We've got blue and pink. Okay, now the idea of this square is that you do these 2 rows of one colour, and then you have rows on top and beside, and it makes this kind of a square pattern, and it ends up looking a bit like a chessboard, hence the name chessboard. So let me just zoom back out so you can see the whole thing. There we go. So as I said on the previous tutorial about the charts that are in a round, of when you need to find your starting position. So if you had one in the round like this, you look for your starting position, and because it is looking like this, you can tell that it's in the round, and you find your starting chain here. Or like this one, you find your start because it's got the magic circle, the magic ring. Now if you look here, excuse me, as I told you last time, each chart usually will have this legend, this key to tell you what all the symbols in this particular chart mean. So here you've got the magic circle, which is here in the middle, so you know that's where you'll start. Whereas this one here shows you chains, and you've got your chain start and slip stitch there. Okay, so you need to look for your start. Now I have said before that being able to read these charts is really good, because if a pattern is in a different language, you might not understand what all the stitches are. If this was a written pattern, you might not understand what it was telling you to do. But if there's a chart and you know what these symbols mean, then excuse me, you'll know a lot of what you need to do. And I did say to you before about one of these cheat sheet type things, and you can get them off of Google or crochet sites, or in the Facebook group in our useful information album. There are some of these on there showing you these symbol keys. As I said, I printed the wrong one out, and I still don't have the correct one. This is still the UK version, so you need the US version to follow our patterns. All our patterns are in US terms of stitches. So again though, it doesn't matter if you use English or the UK, the US version. All the symbols pretty much mean exactly the same thing. It might have a different name of stitch, but if you know how that stitch is done, then you're there. Okay, so let's have a look at this one. So this is our chart in the row. You know it's in the row because you can see this long starting chain here. Okay, this long starting chain here, and this will tell you how many stitches or how many chains you need to do to start off with. And also it tells you here colour A, colour B. So we've got the pink and we've got the blue. So we ignore this part here for now, because this part you can probably see is below this chain, and up here you can see there's a starting chain and a slip stitch for those. So that just provides your border. Okay, that's just your border around there. But these parts that are in the row are what you need to focus on. So see your starting chain, and there are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19. 19 chains there. And then you've got 3 here. Now it doesn't show it immediately next to it because this is what's known as your turning chain. Now, as you probably already realised, in crochet your stitches work from the top downwards. So let me grab a square. So here we go. Now your stitches on here work downwards, so you always need to bring your starting chain up to the height of your stitches. And that's why when we work in the round, grab one here. Here we go. This is the granny square, basic granny square, which is why when we do the basic granny square, we do our middle circle and then we do a chain 3, and you're probably quite familiar with that. Chain 3 and then 2 double crochets, because that brings your stitch up to the height or your hook up to the height of your stitch, you can then work down the height of your stitch. Now in, I think it was tutorial number 2, when I talked to you about how to do stitches in rows, because it does look different when you turn your work. The back of the stitches looks quite a bit different, so you might want to have a look at that, tutorial number 2. And I talked to you there about turning chains and how many you need for each stitch. Okay, so let's have a look at this. Okay, so we said 19, and then you've got these 3 here, so that would be 19, 20, 21, 22. So you would do your starting chain of 22, and if you check this against the written pattern, if you had it, which obviously in our group the patterns are there, you would see it said chain 22. But then it would say to work into the 4th chain. So you've got 3 and then the 4th chain. Okay, so you would work into the 4th chain. Let me just bring this in slightly. There we go. So you're going to work into the 4th chain. This first one, it should tell you on your pattern whether it counts as the first double crochet or not. See, the stitch here is here and it's a double crochet. Okay, so but if you didn't have that pattern, we're talking about working just from charts, you can see here, if you look up, you can see there's a stitch here that is working into that chain. Okay, so that tells you that this does count as a stitch, because you've got a stitch here going into that chain, and then you've got a chain on top and another stitch on top. It shows you that all of these count as stitches along here. And likewise at the end here, you've got all these chains counting as stitches going down here. Okay, so 22 stitches work into the 4th stitch. Okay, and then you can see here these stitches show to work into these chains. Now when I talk to you about working in the round, and you have your middle chain, let me just grab one of those. Here we go. So when I talk about this middle chain, and I said you always work into the chain space, like this, when you're working in the round, you work into the chain space, not into the actual chain. Okay, the difference being working in the row is you need to work this first row, which is known as your foundation row. So this is your foundation chain, and then on top is your foundation row. You have to work into the chains because there isn't really anywhere else to work other than the chain. So you will do each stitch into a chain. You can see each of these stitches is directly above a chain. Okay, so you will do, if you count these, there are 19 stitches here. Okay, 4, 8, 12, 16, 17, 18, 19 stitches there to correspond with your 19 chains. Excuse me. So you will work your 19 and 22 chains, and then you will follow this back along here, going in this direction, your 19 stitches. And then when you've finished here, this 19th stitch, you will be moving on to your next row. Now I should have a pen, grab a pen, a pencil. So this will be row 1. Okay, so this is row 1, and then you will work in this direction. Now if you're watching the left-handed video, I apologize that this will be, my writing will be backwards, but the instructions will be the same for you. Okay, the instructions will be fine, that you'll be following it in the correct direction, but when I write my number it will be backwards because we flip our video over. Okay, so this is row 1 and you're working in this direction, and then row 2 will be this next row here, so this will be row 2. Can I do it backwards? There we go, number 2. Does that look number 2 backwards? And you'll be working back along the row in this direction. Okay, so for your row 2, you need to do your turning chain, as I talked about, bringing your work up to the height of the next row. So you do your 3 chains and then you follow back along, and as you can see, there is a stitch here, which is your double crochet, and they're all double crochets in this main part. So it's directly above your stitch below. So that means you work into the back of your stitch. So you would have your work here and you would work along a row, and then you would turn it over, do your chain 3 at the end, and work back along, going into the back of your stitches. Okay, so you would do all these stitches along, and as you can see, this is the checkerboard, so you will need to change your colours. So in this first row you will have needed to change from pink to blue to pink to blue to pink, or whatever colours you're using. I'm not talking to you about colour changes now, but in the video for this particular square, number 24, the person who did that video will have talked to you about changing those colours and how to do that. So have a look at that, or in one of my tutorials I've talked about colour changes as well. So check those out if you want to know about the colour changes. But I'm just kind of talking to you about how to interpret what's going on here, okay, and not how to do the actual square. So you would know that you needed to do these stitches. So this chain will be above your last stitch of row 1, and then your next stitch will be into the second stitch along. So you need to be careful when you're turning that you do check that it's your second stitch, okay, and that you're not going into your first stitch, because if you do that you'll run out of stitches. If you're just counting, you'll have an extra stitch on the end and won't know what to do with it. Okay, so just miss that first stitch because that's where your chain is, and then do a stitch into every stitch below, remembering to change your colour as that's indicated on here. If this wasn't indicated as a colour change, then you would just continue in the same colour, going above every stitch from the last round. And then when you get to this one here, it's above the chain. So what you will need to do is work into the very top chain of this row below. Now sometimes that chain might have got a bit twisted and it might be quite hard to find that very top chain, but you just need to give it a bit of a wiggle, have a look and find that very top chain there, and then make your hook go through. I'm always talking about giving it a wiggle, so just give it a wiggle and push it through that that chain there, and then do your stitch on top of that chain, and that will be the end of your row 2. So then you'll be coming on to row 3, which is here. So there we go, I'm doing it backwards for the lefties. This will be your row 3 and you'll work it back this way, okay, and then you'll do exactly the same. You'll be doing your chain 3 on top of your stitch, and then doing your second stitch into your second stitch here. So again, as here, remember you need to miss this first double crochet and go into the second one, okay, and then you work all the way along just as you have done before. Again, it's showing you into every stitch, so make sure you go into every stitch. And one thing to remember when you're working along is count your stitches. Count your stitches, because as I said before, it's quite can sometimes be quite tricky working into this chain here, and you've got that at the end of every row you're working into the top of chains, so just be careful of watching that. Okay, so then you'd work back along this way, and then you'd have row 4 back that way all the way along, row 5, oh my gosh, challenging myself here, row 5 that way. Okay, so you'll have row 5 going this way, and then you'll have row 6 going this way, row 7 going that way, 8 that way, 9 going that way, and 10 going this way. There we go. Okay, hope all my numbers work backwards. So you have 10 coming back this way, and then you've got your last stitch here, and that's when you would do your stitch, and then you would fasten off, because that's the end of your rows. Okay, so you have all the odd numbers going in one direction and all the even numbers going in the opposite direction. Okay, so each time you will turn your work, sometimes on a pattern you'll see you work down here and you'll see an arrow, and that kind of indicates to turn, and then you would see here there would be an arrow, oops, an arrow to turn your work. Okay, so that's the basic gist of working in your rows, going back and forth and just following what's there. Now this is quite an easy pattern to show you, that one. The only other thing on this pattern would be up here at the top, because this has got a border, so it's working in rows and it's working in the round as well, is that you can see here it shows you to start your border here, okay, with your chain and your slip stitch. I think there should have been a chain there. Okay, so you do your chain going into your middle stitch here and doing your single crochets all the way around the outside. It shows you you've got a single crochet into each stitch, and then it shows you on this corner you're doing a couple of single crochets in this top chain. And then as you come down your side, because you haven't got actual stitches, you've got the side of stitches rather than the top of stitches. So it shows you that in each stitch you're going to do 3 single crochets. 3 single crochets in each stitch and 3 single crochets in your chain, and you would just work that over the stitch. So you'd have your stitch, where are we? Have your stitch here, and you would work your stitches over that stitch there. Okay, you'd work it over the top of those. So it shows you all the way down and then to this corner again, doing a couple of stitches here to bring you around your corner, and then you're doing 1 stitch into each chain along here, because you'll have the bottom part of your chain still free. So you're working 1 single crochet into each chain there, and then back up 3 single crochets into every stitch, into the side of every stitch, just as we did on this side, and then back up the top 1 in each stitch. And then you will do your this dot here, which we've got, see down here, it says here it's our slip stitch. So you'll do your slip stitch to finish that, and you're used to working in rounds quite a lot, so you'll then move up to your next row and do your chain and single crochet, and again going around 1 into each stitch and 1 into each stitch along the side, and doing your corners. So that's how you work in the row, with a little bit of how you work in the round as well. So that's the basics of working in a row, going one way or finding your foundation chain, doing your first row, turning, doing your turning chains, and working back and then back and back and back. And that's the basic gist of that. We'll have a look at another chart that I can show you against a square I've actually done, with some different stitches going on. So I'll show you that in just a sec. So let's have a look at a chart of a square that I've actually got here. This is number 34, the waffle along square. Some of you might know it as basket weave, but as I said earlier, we already had a basket weave square, which was the strips that were woven in and out. So this one has been given the name waffle along. It was the basket weave square adapted by one of our team anyway, so it's had some extra borders and things put on, so it's been adapted. So it's not strictly the waffle, the basket weave anyway. So this was our waffle along square, and I remember it fairly well because I did the tutorial for it on the YouTube. So check that out if you haven't made the square already. Okay, so this again has the chart shows you a working in rows, and it also shows this single crochet border going on as well. I'm going to change to my hook because I keep writing on it without intending to. So So it's got this border going on around the edge as well. So like the last chart we looked at, you're going to see the foundation chain along the bottom here. Okay, and again we have our stitch key or legend going on here, so you can instantly see what stitches you are doing. So you've got the slip stitch and the chain, which you get in just about every pattern: single crochet, double crochet, half double crochet, back post, double crochet, and front post double crochet. So you might not have done those before, but if you haven't, you can always look them up and see how to do that. If you get confronted with a chart, you don't know how to do them, then you can always look that up on Google or look for another pattern with it in. Usually in the written pattern, these stitches that haven't come up before, we do give you a description of how to do it, and if not, then you can flick to the YouTube and just watch to see how that particular stitch is done. Yeah, so that tells you what stitches you've got to do. So if we look here, we've got your foundation chain as usual, so you would count along there and see how many. So 1 2 3 4 5 6 7 8 9 10 11 12 13 14 15 16 17 18 19 20 21 22 23 24 24 and then 25. Okay, so because this is a single crochet, you only need one chain to turn. Okay, because it's just a small stitch, so, and that never counts the stitch because it's only a tiny stitch. So you do your 25 chains and then work into your second chain. So if you remember what we said before, you do your chain always comes along this way, so chain always comes that way. I'm gonna have to write this out differently, aren't I? Chain always goes this way. Okay, and then your row 1 will always go this way. So you've got your chain, turning chain, and then your first row, and then you get to the end of your row and you will see. Now remember, you're going to ignore this going up the side because this is your border, because you can see this slip stitch up the top and you can see your foundation chain here. So you do your last stitch into your chain, so you do your 24 stitches all into the chain, and then you would come up to your next row. Okay, remember, you are ignoring this part here. Okay, you're not going to go over those stitches, so you're going to do your chain, and then you're going to do your 24 stitches all the way back, chain, and remember, you're turning your work every time here as well, and you're working back along. And now here is where it changes, and you can see you've got 2 chains here. I'm just going to get something else to lay over here. Here we go. Let's lay that over there so we can't see that. Okay, so you've got here 2 chains because you are changing to this stitch, and if you look, you can see it's a double crochet. But if you didn't have this legend here, or it was in another language, if you learn what these symbols mean in your terms, so if you were in the UK, this would be a treble crochet, and these here would be double crochets. But if you know what the symbol means, then it doesn't matter whether this says it's a double, treble, triple, half, quadruple stitch or whatever. I don't even know if that exists, but it doesn't matter. You know what that symbol means. Okay, and as I told you, I think it was in the last video, that your stitches with hats on always mean you have to do a yarn over before you go into the stitch. Okay, so if you see one without a hat, like this one here, that's the half double crochet. So you know that's a half double because it's got a hat but it's got no bar, and it's the only one without a bar. So that's the half double. Then the double has 1 line because that's only 1 yarn over, and then you have the treble with 2 yarn overs because you do 2 yarn overs at the start, and then you have the double treble with 3 bars. You do 3 yarn overs at the start, and then if you see one that's really tall and has 1 2 3 4 5, I don't even know what that's called, but I could work it out probably, but it doesn't matter what it's called. You know that's 5 yarn overs, and you know that on most stitches you go in, pull through again, and then you go through 2 loops at a time. You go through 2 loops, and then you go through another 2 loops, and then through another 2 loops, until you get back to just 1 loop on your chain, so on your hook. So that's one reason I like using charts, because it doesn't matter whether you know what it is or not. You can just follow some of those basic ideas. Okay, so you are moving to doing a double crochet here, going back to US terms. Okay, so you're then going to do your double crochets back again. You can see it goes into each stitch here, and then here, because you're only going to be going to half double crochets, you're back to doing a chain. Okay, so you would do that chain, and then it shows you here that you are doing your half double crochet into your first stitch there. Okay, and then it shows you do 2 more into one into each stitch, and then you see this funny symbol which indicates, if you look here, this going this way like a C, so it's showing you the back post double crochet, and it's right above this stitch here, so that means you're doing your back post double crochet into that stitch there, and in the next 2 you're going around and doing your back post double crochet on those 2, and then you can see here it changes to the opposite direction, and you've got that here, you're doing a front post double crochet. Now I know these don't work too well on left-handed videos, they kind of swap, you'll see them backwards. I don't think it would make too much difference on your final result actually, but yeah, they would be flipped, so you'd be doing front post and then back post rather than back post and then front post. I don't think it should give too much of a difference. The only difference is, if you look at mine here, is that where these ones are raised and these ones are behind, you would have them in the opposite way. So you'd have raised ones here, so these ones here, you'd have raised ones here, and then you'd have the back ones here. So you'd have raised back, raised back, raised, and then back, raised and back. So they would just be in the opposite way around, which wouldn't make too much of a difference actually to how your square would come out. It literally would just be, these would be in reverse, but as long as you were consistent in following what you saw, then it would come out as I said, like this, but the other way around. If I turn this, actually you can see this one here is raised, but if I turn it, it's back on the other side. So actually I think it should turn out that if you followed this as a left-hander with this in flipped in a mirror image, you would see it would just be like the back of the right-handed, and yeah, that's probably how. I'm quite intrigued by that now. So anyway, so you would just do that along, following what it says is shown into each stitch, and it's the same here. Just follow it along. Make sure you count, make sure you double check how many there are going into each stitch, or how many there are along. So 1 2 3 1 2 3 1 2 3 1 2 3. Okay, so make sure you know when you're swapping. And then we've got some of these rows here. You start, this one is the back post, front post, back post, back post, front post, front post, back post, back post. So when there's symbols like this, just make sure you're double checking and that you're counting. Counting is quite important in crochet. Count, or you'll have to frog as in rip it out and start again. So I'd rather count than have to rip it all out personally. So this one's lost part of its symbol in being printed. So then you'll see here, when you get to the end of this row, it shows your turning chain because you're going back to doing your border. Okay, if you see down here, we had our border bottom edge. So we've got our top edge, and we've got our bottom edge where there is none of this waffly weave going on. Okay, so you're going back to doing rows of double crochets, and single crochets, okay? And then you can see here you are going from working in the row to then going round. So you're going here and then you're starting here and going around. No, you're not. You're starting here and going around. So you'll just work that border around, okay, and follow it until you get to your slip stitch and finish off. So that's kind of how to read the charts in the row.